Hi, Roz. Could you please introduce yourself briefly?
Okay, sure. Hi, I'm Roz. I'm a junior at Emma Willard, and I'm really interested in environmental topics like marine biology, environmental justice, and sustainability.
Yeah, thank you. On Martin Luther King Day this year, you did a presentation on environmental justice and environmental racism. What is environmental racism?
So, environmental racism is a form of systematic racism that disproportionately exposes BIPOC communities to pollution and hazardous conditions in their homes, neighborhoods, schools, where they work, and just basically multiple areas of their lives through unfair policies and practices such as redlining. And this can look like either, I don't know, placing hazardous waste facilities near BIPOC communities or displacing these BIPOC communities near hazardous waste facilities like landfills and incinerators. And it could also look like BIPOC communities having inadequate access to healthy water, food, air, things like that.
Thank you. You mentioned redlining. What exactly is redlining? How did it start? And what environmental impacts did redlining have on people of color?
So, redlining was a discriminatory practice done by banks, and it was banned in 1968. But it was basically the practice of denying financial services like credit, loans, mortgages, um, from people who lived in neighborhoods with a significant number of racial and ethnic minorities. So, African Americans suffered the most from this.
Yeah.
So basically, even when a person of color or an immigrant checked all the boxes to qualify for something like a loan, if they lived in these red zones, like these specific neighborhoods, they would automatically be turned down because to the banks, these areas were seen as very risky because they thought, oh, if there are African Americans in here, if there are people of color in here, then it's a risky investment. They're probably not going to give us our money back. The houses, the properties are going to decline in value. So that's basically what redlining is.
Yeah.
Um, and the environmental impacts, I think, I think right now, redline communities have higher pollution,
Mhm.
less vegetation, so it's harder to access healthy food.
Yeah.
More noise pollution, like if they're near highways and like incinerators, factories, like big industrial machines, and just higher temperatures. And that's because redlining prevented people from owning houses and it pushed businesses out. So the
Mm.
values of the properties did incline. And now, because toxic waste facilities and incinerators, these types of toxic waste facilities like being established in areas where the land value is low. So now it's just this cycle of people of color communities and low income communities, the houses, the properties, they're really cheap. And now there are industrial sites coming there because it is really cheap. But the only reason it is really cheap is because of redlining. So it's just this cycle that's been created because of redlining. And now it just results in people of color having to be exposed to fumes, toxic dust, ash, and just other pollutions. And now they have higher risks of health problems.
Yeah, thank you for sharing this. Thank you. Yeah, it's a really important issue.
Yeah.
Um, what are some examples of environmental racism or injustice in our area around Troy, Albany, and Saratoga, etc.?
I think one example is the Ezra Prentice homes in Albany, New York.
Mm.
Um, Basically in the 1960s, when the Empire State Plaza was being like built, over 1,000 homes were demolished, and that left 7,000 residents displaced.
Mm.
Now, what happened was that most white residents were able to get houses in the city's outlying neighborhoods and suburbs, but the Black residents were shepherded in the early 1970s by officials and a relocation agency to public housing. So they wanted all the people of color and Black residents to be together, not really spread out.
Mm,
So one of the public housing projects that they were placed in was Ezra Prentice Homes in Albany. And it's placed like in the middle of just an industrial zone on South Pearl. So
mm,
basically, these homes are next to the Port of Albany, I-787, where there's heavy diesel truck traffic,
mm,
Albany County's water waste treatment plant, a bulk petroleum storage site. So there's just so many different industrial waste facilities, highways, just a lot of pollution. So now studies are finding that South End residents are 3 times more likely to be hospitalized for asthma and 2 times more likely to be hospitalized for diabetes compared to
mm,
all Albany County residents.
mm,
So that's a big example of environmental justice in Albany. I
mm,
also know one in Cohoes, and that's called Norlite. It's a hazardous waste incinerator. And basically Norlite takes pollutants like PFAS, lead, mercury, they filter it out, and then they mix it in the open air to create block mix. And then they store these massive piles of block mix. It kind of looks like sand, just out in the open with no covering. And literally right next to Norlight, there's this public housing center called Saratoga Sites. So now, this process creates so much dust that at Saratoga sites, people's cars, like there can be like little piles of sand on it. So
oh,
just imagine the amount of dust that's in the kids and just
yeah.
people's lungs that live there.
Oh,
Um, so, even though the DEC has fined just many fines, I bet they equate to over like $1 million. Norlake continues to just run and harm this public housing facility. And it's an example of environmental injustice because this housing facility is disproportionately affected by the pollution of Norlite. So that's another example.
yes,
Mhm.
thank you. These sounds really horrible. Yeah,
Mhm.
they're crazy. I never knew that they are like so common. And yeah,
Mhm.
thank you for sharing that. Um, could you talk about some examples of environmental injustices in the world?
Okay, so an obvious one is Flint, Michigan, the water crisis. Basically, the city switched up its drinking water supply from the Detroit system to Flint River to save money,
Mm,
but there was just an inadequate treatment and testing of the water supply, as well as a terrible response from the government when people kept complaining about the water's smell, the discoloration, and the taste.
mm,
So, as a result, a lot of people and a lot of children started getting lead in their blood supply because of the water and just a bunch of health issues because of this water. And
mm,
it's a reason of environmental racism and injustice because Flint has a predominant African American and low income population. So it makes us think if Flint was a healthy community, would these complaints be downplayed? Would they be pushed off? And they would not. Thinking about environmental injustice internationally, we can think of this thing of when country like we can think of transboundary movement of hazardous wastes. And basically this is when developed countries export their waste to less developing nations. And this is a problem of environmental injustice, because people that live in these less developing countries not only have to deal with their waste and being in close proximity to their waste and the health risks that come with that, they
mm.
also have to be exposed to other countries' waste. And obviously, the countries that are exporting their trash, they have much more trash.
Yeah.
So The people that live in these nations, they're just disproportionately affected by the overwhelming amount of trash and just pollution, and that leads to health problems.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. What made you interested in this topic?
So for my signature project, I really wanted to do a project based on something related to the environment. So in the beginning of the year, I just did a lot of research on what that could be. Um, one idea I had was that I could do a research paper. Another idea was that I could, I don't know, be involved in like local community gardens. But then I read about environmental injustice and environmental racism.
Yeah,
And when I read it, I was like really surprised because obviously I never really gave it much thought, but once I read the definition of it and like how it can affect people's lives and examples of it literally near
yeah,
us, I was so surprised because I did notice it. I mean, when I went to downtown Albany, to my dad's store, like I remember seeing, some like phenomenon of environmental injustice. But when I actually read the definition, I was like, okay, that's what it is. And like this is happening. This is a real issue.
yeah,
And I realized that if I hadn't really given it much thought, probably other people haven't even thought about it. So that's when I was like, I'd love to do something on environmental injustice and racism and just spreading awareness about it because that's really important. So I got the idea to do a podcast and yeah.
yeah. Thank you. And our last question is, what can we as students do to help prevent or reduce the impact of environmental injustice and environmental racism?
So I think one way to do that is when we're old enough being educated on who we're voting for, whether that's in presidential elections, but it's more important, like in the local elections.
Yeah.
So just educating ourselves on the people that are running for office so we can vote for people who plan on aiding environmental racism and environmental injustice in our community.
Mhm.
Also, holding current local officials accountable by sending them letters, emails, maybe lobbying. Some organizations allow kids under 18 to lobby. That's basically just trying to convince politicians to pass a bill or just do more work on a specific cause. So that would be really cool. Um, on the individual level, I think volunteering is a great way to get involved. So just helping out at food pantries, local environmental profits like the Raddick Center, that's in Albany, and community gardens, just getting your hands dirty or your mind dirty, just helping out. Um, but most importantly, in my opinion, for students, I think we have a really big responsibility of just being educated on this issue,
Yeah.
especially given the fact that we're near so many instances of environmental injustice and racism, both in Troy, but also in New York State. So just being educated, educating the people around you, that can really lead to like all the things I talked about voting, volunteering, because you first have to be educated on an issue to really help.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Thank
definitely
you.
agree. I think staying informed and being aware of what's happening in the local area is definitely really important. Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.